Namaskar, Dr. Neena. Good to see you. Such a live, vibrant background that you are at today. Uh, so nice to see you, and it's a pleasure to have so many people joining us on a Sunday morning. Um, and I would like to start this session by telling that your book was actually recommended to me by a very dear friend, which is a common friend to both of us, Sumedha. And I couldn't recall that I met you during January 2020 Ikigai session that we had hosted. But when I actually saw you, I could recognize. And as I always say, there is a reason why books come to you or someone recommends a book to you. There's some intelligence in these pages that are being transferred from the author into these books that they can relate to the people who need it the most. And every book that comes to me is usually for a reason. But this book actually came to me at a time when I was thinking about something which is slightly annoying. And your book gave me a lot of calm, I should say. It pacified me. It took away a lot of anxiety. And initially, for the first few days when the book arrived, when you sent the book to me, I'm very thankful to you for that, and to Sumedha as well, who recommended this book to me and connected us. For the first few days, I was actually reading about history as a subject because that was the book I had to finish. And then somehow I was going through some disturbing questions regarding some work I'm engaged into. And I thought, okay, let me just pick up this book. And the first page that I opened was where you have you have written about Utkarsh. And I've carried some dead bodies in my life recently as well. And that's how that stillness in that page, the purpose because of which you have dedicated this book to all the people who face grief, to manage it with a lot of grace and growth. I think that's remarkable. To all the people who have joined here today, to me, Dr. Neena Verma is truly an inspiration. And also, I think her son Pratyush is also here. Thank you, Pratyush, for your words that changed the way your mother took that entire journey into a very different way. And the name of Pratyush is being mentioned many at times in this book. But towards the end, there's a beautiful story that Pratyush narrated to his mother. And that's the story of a rainbow crow. And I now consider Dr. Neena Verma to be a rainbow crow. Now, many of you who have not heard this legendary tale, this mythological tale, might be thinking why I'm calling her a rainbow crow. But once I will finish this story, you may realize why I'm saying so. And I'll take the help of the book, Dr. Neena Verma. With your due permission, I'll read out the story. I was thinking I will use it in my own with my own words, but I thought the essence will not come if I won't read it from the book. I usually don't read in these sessions, but I think this story is a must to be told to everyone who's joined us here or who's watching us or will watch us, because this sets a tone of how we should take challenges, calamities in our life, and why should we be resilient and be more graceful and grateful about whatever we have. So the story says, as all the stories start in the world, once upon a time, it was a green and beautiful world. All beings were happy and healthy. One day, the creator who created by thinking what will be thought of cold, and the snow spirit descended and covered the entire world with mist and frost, like it's happening in Delhi nowadays. For a while, it was a novelty. All creatures played in the snow and had fun, like it always happens during the first months of the winter in Delhi or anywhere. We just go play with the snow, make snowmen, and we feel too joyous about it. But soon, many creatures died of biting cold, and those who survived feared for their lives. The wise owl decided that someone should have to travel to the abode of the creator and plead him, please God, please, enough of this thund, enough of this jada, enough of this cold. The question was, who should go? Who should ring the bell? Owl itself only could see in the dark and would have been blinded by the radiance of the Creator. Turtle was too slow. Coyote, although fast and smart, wasn't going to be wise in a way that would gain the Creator's positive attention. And then volunteered the rainbow crow, the most beautiful of all the birds, the one with a uniquely enchanting voice, spread its magnificent rainbow-hued feathers and spoke mellifluously, "I will go." Indeed, only the one with such a mesmerizing appearance, melodious voice, gentle manner, and wisdom should make an appeal and talk to the Creator, the Almighty Lord. Thus chosen, off flew the rainbow crow, up and beyond the skies, the moon, the stars, and the sun, braving torturing winds for 3 days and nights, stopping only at the abode of the Creator. In his mellifluous, beautiful voice, he called out to the Creator, "Help!" The Creator was busy because he was a creator, so he was thinking. He was in a thinking mode. The rainbow crow again thought of calling for help. It didn't work, so it began to sing, drawing the Creator's curiosity. Pleased with his soulful rendition, it's like a prayer, as if he was making a prayer. The Creator asked what gifts he would offer to the rainbow crow. All that the selfless and compassionate bird had in mind was the misery of his people, all the people who were dying of cold, or all the creatures who were dying of cold. He asked the Creator to unthink snow. Unthink snow, I will read it again. But once thought by the Creator, the snow spirit had already come into the existence and couldn't be destroyed. The coldness was already there. Reassuring the dejected rainbow crow, the Creator offered to think of fire which would warm all creatures and melt the snow. Delighted and grateful for the Creator's gift, the rainbow crow quickly left carrying the stick of fire, taking the same 3 days long arduous journey. Along the way, fire grew hot, and as he flew past the sun, his tail caught fire and burnt his splendid feathers. Though undeterred, he kept flying. As he leaped through the clouds, the smoke choked his throat and his sweet voice. The most beautiful and melodious of all the birds, the rainbow crow returned home ugly and hoarse, all black in body, and nothing but a husky caw in place of his enchanting croon. Yet his sense of gratitude for being able to save fellow creatures remained stronger than the grief of losing his mesmerizing persona. Happy with the warmth of the fire spirit and the melting of the snow, all creatures began to rejoice, sad and embarrassed over his blackened feathers and hoarse voice, as the rainbow crow sat alone grieving what felt like his symbolic death. He felt the Creator's presence in the form of whiff and touch of breeze, and heard him say, "Do not be sad, dear bird. This end is not the end. You begin anew as a bird that all will honor for selflessness, compassion, and courage." And if you can relate it to our culture here, we recognize crow to be a very important aspect of our lives. We say the guests will come, the good things will come to you. Men won't hunt you any longer, my child, since your flesh is now made of smoke. And your hoarse voice would keep them from caging you. You will be a free spirit. The grace revealed itself to the chosen bird as he heard the Creator say, "Beneath your lost outer beauty, your inner beauty is eternal. Just spread your feathers and look within. The iridescent hues of your goodness will always radiate." The rainbow crow saw with amazement that all the rainbow colors were dazzling inside the black of his burnt feathers. And so it has been since the start of universe, and so it shall be forever. No matter what, the rainbow colors of grace shall always continue to sparkle from within the darkness of grief. Thank you, Pratyush, and thank you, Dr. Neena, for putting this remarkable story. And if all of us can relate to this remarkable story, we all are, in our good times, we all are rainbow crows. But what happens when we face some calamity, when we come across some pandemic like Corona, we lose a lot of our patience, our grace, our gratefulness, and we become very selfish. And that's where what comes out is your internal beauty. And I can relate it to you, Dr. Neena, because your book is definitely a gift to all those who live. And as you have mentioned, and it's been part of our culture as well. In fact, the next book that we are talking about is Everyday Gita by Sunita Bansal. She's here, which is Everyday Gita. And Gita is such a remarkable lifelong tale, which starts from the transcendental knowledge. And I can relate the two books coming to my life together. And I'm very, very thankful to you, Dr. Neena Verma, for this gift. And as part of our little gift to everyone, we have some copies of the book that we are sending to everyone. Whoever thinks they can benefit out of this life work of Dr. Neena Verma, we would be happy to send a copy. I now request you, Dr. Neena Verma, to enlighten us more about life and how we should live life in such a graceful and such a growth mindset way. But yes, formally, let me introduce you as well to everyone. Certainly, you are an author, but ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Neena is the first and foremost a mother, a meaning-inspired person and scholarly practitioner. She is a grief and growth specialist, counselor and expert companion, appreciative inquiry and positive psychology practitioner, and a leadership and life coach. She combines appreciative inquiry, positive psychology, logotherapy, poetry, therapeutic writing, and expressive arts to facilitate meaning-centric deep growth. She's a professional member of the NTL Institute for Applied Behavior Science, professional certified coach from the International Coaching Federation, ICC, and an associate of the Taos Institute. Her grief memoir, A Mother's Cry, A Mother's Celebration, has helped many bereaved people. She runs an independent library movement for underserved children, and we are happy to be part of it, Dr. Neena. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mohitji. Namaste, everyone. And with your permission, may I begin with two things. One is just a gentle correction that it is underserved children. Unfortunately, our sociological setup is such that they end up being undeserved children, but they are basically underserved or, less privileged children. And with your permission, may I begin by invoking the group to hold a moment of silence as a tribute and a quiet gratitude to Mahatma Gandhi, whose Punyatithi it is today. Just a moment. Thank you so much. So I begin by saying a tiny part, of course, with Sunita ji around. I should not get into the depth of Bhagavad Gita. She is the expert. But just a tiny part from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, that from chapter 2, the verse 2, she would know, is, and ma'am, if my pronunciation and diction is wrong, please correct me. That is, Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityur dhruvam. So death is the only certain truth of life, along with birth. In between these two eternal truths, the drama of life unfolds. And there's emotion, there's romance, there's comedy, there's action, there's adventure, suspense, mystery, everything. All chapters that we welcome, except one chapter, which is about loss and bereavement and death and grief. That's a chapter of life's drama that is generally preferred to be kept behind the curtains of the drama of life. And not without reason. We are not really doing something wrong on purpose. It is just that we are not socially groomed or individually attuned to be around in an atmosphere of loss or trauma or grief. There's a sense of awkwardness, there's a sense of incapacity, there's a sense of inadequacy, there's a sense of, not knowing how to hold a space, whether for ourselves or for others, when we are experiencing loss, trauma, and grief. And this is not just about bereavement related grief. This could be grief on account of any kind of loss. And there are several non-death losses. In Corona, there have been loss of livelihood for a large section of society. There's been loss of childhood for nearly 2 years for not just the underserved and less privileged children who are also experiencing a serious digital divide, and they have been deprived of education, but also in the, so to say, privileged background, privileged families. There's loss of childhood in the last 2 years. There's loss of security. And then in normal circumstances also, there are several losses. We could have loss of health. Like I had recently, when in second wave of Corona, I got caught and I was nearly critical and had nearly died. So there's serious loss of health. There could be loss of vitality as we age. Then in organizations, which is where nobody talks of loss, is that loss of opportunity, loss of fairness could be there, loss because the circumstances could be manipulative, loss because they could be deprived opportunities, missed opportunities because some people are quiet workers and don't get recognized or get caught in the whirlpool of the organizational politics. So there's several non-death losses also which cause grief. However, just to make a disclaimer, my book's purview is bereavement caused grief. It is not even ambiguous grief. So though I talk about pandemic caused grief and complicated grief and disenfranchised grief and ambiguous grief. So for example, my dear friend Zia Sahab has pointed out that Kashmiri women, whom I am very hesitant to call widows until they choose to call themselves widow, whose husbands have been, missing for years together, they experience a sense of ambiguous loss and do not know when to stop waiting and when to start grieving. Similarly, a common example that all of us know is about Malaysian Airlines, which just disappeared. And in the process, families are left searching and yearning for nearly 8 years now. 30th March, it would be 8 years since Malaysian Airlines disappeared, that aircraft disappeared. And so there are various forms that grief takes. There's disenfranchised grief. When, say, for example, a very common example of disenfranchised grief is when in our society, loss of pregnancy or stillbirth are recognized or known more like physical events. They're thought to be more physiological events. And therefore, there's no space or atmosphere for the woman who's experienced this to allow her grief and expression. Similarly, there could be stigmatized deaths or death bereavement on account of suicide. The kind of, hush-hushness that is worn around that does not allow the griever to have a normal and natural process of grieving. So their grief in some sense remains disenfranchised. Then there could be traumatic bereavement on account of, say, in common example, say accident is there, a serious accident, the person remained in trauma and there was hope that the person would come out of it, but eventually the death happened. Or socio-communal violence, somebody dying to that. So there is an immense sense of trauma about grief. So trauma sometimes is stronger than the grief of loss. And in such circumstances, especially, the grief could have manifestations which are technically called complicated and or prolonged acute grief. It could prolong in an acute and chronic way. So that is not the purview of this book. The purview of this book is bereavement and grief on account of, death, which are not traumatic or are not experiencing acute complicated grief, though I do touch upon the complicated grief in lesser intensity. So this is just, I'm telling you about what is the purview of this book. Now, the book is in 3 parts. The first part sets the foundation for what really grief is. And I think just the title of second chapter for me says it all about what really grief is. Many people ask me, why do you say that grief should not have a timeline or one should move on? I say that grief is the cry of love. If love is there, as long as love is alive, the grief can stay alive. Sometimes grief has no closure for entire lifetime, which too is fine as long as there are no medical or pathological complications to it. And why is it so? Because grief is an expression of love. It's a somber expression of love. And though the mortal body of our bereaved loved one has died, the relationship does not die. The love does not die. The love is the most abiding truth. It's the most eternal feeling. And love always, love and faith, if we allow them a chance to be noticed and recognized, love and faith always stays stronger than our grief. So grief basically is the cry of love. But then in the second chapter, I also take the reader through some of the conceptual understanding about the various reactions grief could have, the various metaphors with which people understand or relate to grief. And I also bust few myths and clear the mist of some of the myths, common myths around grief. But then the second part is the heart and mind of the book. This is the longest part of the book. This is about growth, the second process, growth. And here I introduce my 6-aspect model, which I call growth mandala. And here I have drawn on the mandala symbolism, and I have combined it with the metaphor of pilgrimage and offered a 6-aspect, or you can call it 6-phase model. Here, all phases are, sovereign. So the first phase of grief affirmation, the phase of resilient adaptation, the phase of opening to the emergent post-loss reality, the phase of way to well-being, trying to restore well-being to some extent. It can never go back to the old normal, but finding a way to create a new normal of well-being for ourselves. And then the deeper, the more inner layers of deep transformation, deep existential growth, that is T for transformation. And finally, H, which is harmonious reemergence. In the reemergence phase, we come back with, a sense of having found meaning in our mourning, pain in our purpose, and, love in our lament, but we don't come back to ourselves or for ourselves. When we return to the world, it is always in transcendence beyond ourselves. The return to the world from the final shrine of harmonious reemergence, meaningful reemergence, is when we bring the prasad from the shrine, or the nectar of growth from the shrine, in service of others, in service of the world. So that final phase is the phase of self-transcendent return to the world. So this growth mandala model is all about post-traumatic growth with resilience, with meaning, a sense of meaningfulness, a sense of purposefulness, a sense of higher calling beyond our grief. And then the final part is about grace, which is, some people are finding it spiritual, which I'm very happy to say. For me, spirituality is more an existential process than a religious process. So the path of grace in the context of grief, especially for me, begins with forgiveness, forgiving the loss. Because I have been working, I will just in a moment tell you my history in grief space. I have worked with many people. I have volunteered for a much larger people, the people from underserved background, or people who are victims of socio-communal violence, who have lost their loved ones to socio-communal violence. And one thing that I found in the, so to say, normal circumstances, or in the, so to say, traumatic circumstances, in many cases, many of us hold some kind of, a sense of being wronged by destiny, being betrayed by whoever we know as God, whoever is our God, the sense of unfairness, especially in untimely or unexpected or traumatic losses, especially the lives which have been cut short, which have been curtailed, which have been taken away without, a loss that we can't make sense of. And yet we are able to find meaning in that the moment we begin our grace pilgrimage, starting from forgiveness. Sometimes we hold genuine regrets and genuine complaints. Maybe somebody who we expected to get help from did not come around to help us. Maybe medical technology failed us. Maybe something else happened which we can attribute our loss to. So forgiveness to that, but most of all, most importantly, forgiveness to ourselves, because in our own vulnerable moments, sometimes we end up hurting others with statements which might be coming from our own incoherent state in grief, with our own words which are coming from I did this, I think I uttered things which might have hurt some people, including my family. So my journey of forgiveness began by seeking forgiveness. So start by seeking forgiveness from others, start by forgiving yourself, and then you start forgiving others. And then the gratitude and the reverence and affirmation for life, compassion, and eventually the grace path takes you to a state of finding meaning in your suffering. And the book culminates with a prayer that I have written. If we will have time, I would later like to, maybe invite my son Pratyush to recite that poem, who does it very well. And uh, to give you a little background that I have in this grief space, Mohitji, do we have time? Can I go on for 2 more minutes?
Yes, yes, certainly, please.
Okay. So, by professional background, I'm an organization change and development expert. My training was in organizational behavior and development. And I was into coaching, leadership coaching, executive coaching, team coaching since 2005. It was in 2008 that in one of my executive coaching assignments, by third session, I realized that perhaps this was not really a coaching domain, that the coachee was sitting on an overload of grief and trauma from his early childhood. And I informed the company people, his sponsor and the HR department, that perhaps he needs therapy and I'm not the competent person to help him through. And then a couple of weeks, about 20 days later, the organization came back to me saying that he's somehow feeling a sense of trust with you. So do whatever you can. And I felt very nervous and confused because I did not have any background in psychotherapy and grief, especially no way. Grief and trauma, I had absolutely no background about. But yes, of course, I was a trained and accredited sensitivity professional. And I had enough background in Jungian depth psychology and logotherapy and appreciative inquiry. So somehow I kind of, I gave myself a little bit of confidence, and then I started to, and I don't think I did much work with him other than holding space for him to allow his, suppressed, for nearly 35 years, he had been sitting on all that accumulated grief and trauma. Allow this an expression and slowly and gradually help him kind of reframe his life constructs from being a victim to a person who's now ready to take charge of his life. So by the grace of God, 6 months down the line, the person felt very benefited, and the company felt that maybe they could refer a couple more cases to me. And somehow the word spread. We used to live in Chandigarh at that point in time. Some more companies invited me to do similar work. And though I was initially very confused, unsure, uncertain, and nervous, but slowly and gradually I started to develop a greater and deeper interest in the subject. And then 2011 onwards, I started to take a proper, self-education process in this. And I could not go for a psychology degree because I'm a management student, and you can't get into psychology formal education if you're not a psychology student from the start. But whatever other, professional accreditations or courses I could attend, I started to attend. And slowly and gradually, my interest in this was growing stronger and deeper. However, in 2014, my engagement with my subject changed. It reached a different depth, and it gave me a different kind of wisdom when tragedy struck me and I was caught in the whirlpool of grief. And so in 2014 September, my eldest son Utkarsh, maybe you can see him sitting right behind me, we lost him to a sudden, inexplicable, undetected cardiac condition. and we lost him in a matter of minutes. A healthy, bright, young, quiet boy, 22 years and 3 months exactly. And on supposedly, I can say perhaps the happiest day of his life. He had just received the news for his a very prestigious work study fellowship to pursue his higher education and research. And we were all very happy, and had all been well, he would have perhaps left within a month's time. But he left for good. He slept after his evening run for 5-10 minutes only. He lied down to snooze and he never woke up. So for about 2 years, I remained in my own black hole of grief. And it seemed like there's going to be no return ever. A person who was still being called by others for help didn't know how to help herself. And but it just, sometimes the way life turns, my younger son, Pratyush, who we all used to think is the toy of the family, the exuberant, happy-go-lucky, chirpy kid. It just so happened that I think some kind of a role reversal happened. He was just about 18 when the loss happened. And he turned my parent, and he turned my grief counselor, and he started to hold my hand. And I would credit my coming back to life entirely and squarely to Pratyush. And then to two more people. One more person who just kept at me. Of course, my husband's support is monumental and quietly there all the time. Outside of family, one person who just kept with me is my Appreciative Inquiry mentor, the co-creator of Appreciative Inquiry, Dr. Ron Fry, who just kept at me. He didn't let go of me. And at some point, he convinced me to return to Appreciative Inquiry work in his wisdom, thinking that it would perhaps help me rebuild my rhythm. I did come back to it. However, after doing that work for about a year or a little longer, I realized that maybe my calling is grief only, and I need to devote myself full time to that work. And then my grief psychology mentor, Bob Niemeyer, held me through that growth journey. By the grace of God, now I think I'm sufficiently grounded as a practitioner in that area. And I've been practicing since 2017 on a full-time basis as a grief and growth specialist. And some people ask me, is this a coaching matter? I would say no. Grief in its rawness, and when it is acute, when it is new especially, but even if after a period of time, if it continues to be strong and chronic, it is not in the coaching zone. But the moment people start to learn to live with their grief, and they have slowly started to move towards the phase of resilient adaptation, and they look like they are now ready to start opening themselves up to the emergent post-loss life, that is when we can perhaps take them into the growth coaching space. That is when the post-traumatic growth conversations can and should begin. So in the last nearly 5 years, that's what I have been doing. That's my life's calling. I do sometimes continue to do appreciative inquiry work because that is another thing that is very, very dear to my heart. But I'm fully devoted to grief and growth work now. And other than that, as a family, we run an independent library movement. That is our way to take forward Utkarsh's life mission. When he was 8 years and not yet 4 months, we used to live in Noida, and he started a weekend pavement library endeavor. He used to carry 2 backpacks of books from home, and he would just lay a mat that he used to carry from home, and his regular tiffin and the water bottle. I used to drop him at 11 a.m. in a slum area nearby our home. And I used to pick him around 5. winter, summer, monsoon, he would be there on weekends. And during the weekdays, our home doors were always open to children from the neighborhood, the lesser privileged background children who would come home for help with their homework, with their studies, revision, other things. And slowly and gradually, Utkarsh roped me and my younger son also into this. So we didn't realize when we became his partners in this. And then later, his work extended to very quietly and invisibly also helping the homeless children on the traffic lights he used to go and sensitize them against substance abuse. And whatever little pocket money we gave him, which he never wanted, he used to spend on just buying them something, some biscuits, some blankets, whatever he could. So his life mission was to, after his higher education and research, was to work for inclusive learning in the lesser privileged areas. He wanted to take the children from that background into education for science, mathematics, and technology. That is what his life mission was. And of course, though both my sons are engineers, but I have a no ka aakada with science, so I can't do anything in that area. But of course, the libraries, we decided we will carry it on. So far, we have set up 9 libraries, static libraries, and we run a mobile library in Rajasthan in a tribal area for tribal girls, and we've contributed to others' libraries, other running libraries of some NGO partners. So that's our way of returning to the world with the mission of Seva, in which all 3 of us, my husband, my son, and myself, and of course, our guiding light is Utkarsh. So I think I've taken more time than I should have.
No, ma'am, not at all. No, I don't think anyone was counting time here. And but yes, to one of the myths which is related to time, you have mentioned in your book, which is time heals. While you just mentioned you took time, but in your book you mention about a myth which is time heals, and you say, well, not quite. Why didn't you tell something more about it? Because this is a common way of saying it. Anything happens, don't worry, time will heal. Time heals everything. You have a very interesting and a very different perspective on that, which is actually an eye-opener, and that's why you're calling it a myth. So please.
So grief by itself, we all know, is a normal and natural response to loss. Loss of any kind could be there. I've already talked about it. One thing that we need to understand about quite a few things, but a couple of things that I would underline here is that grief is a sovereign process. It has its own pace, its own form, its own rhythm. Some days would be very quiet. So in my grief memoir, somewhere I've written that sometimes there's deadening silence and sometimes there's a deafening wail. So it's like, it's in waves. And sometimes the waves crash on the shore. And sometimes the waves just come and caress your toes and your feet. And they're so quiet and subtle in their effects. So grief happens in its own way. It's a roller coaster. We don't know when we are deep down in the bottomless pit, and we don't know when we are on a giddy ride up. So we do not have a lot of influence on our grief experience. But grieving could be an active and conscious process. So that's where perhaps we have a way to engage with ourselves and way to intervene, make an intervention with our own experiential state. So when people say time heals, to that there's a sense of resignation, surrender, but not surrender in faith, not surrender with, not a conscious surrender to let time work with you and to prepare yourself to work with time. So instead, when we say time heals, in grief, there's a sense of resignation. being lost to it, then letting the higher power take over, which it does. We, as David Rico beautifully says, that we achieve by effort, but we receive by grace. So no matter what you do and how much you do, ultimately, it is only when grace chooses you for a certain blessing is when the blessing happens. So, of course, time heals, but not without you working with the time given to you. It's like if you are a fan of Lord of the Rings and that beautiful sequence where Gandalf says that it's all about, or the only question that we have to answer is what to do with the time that we have been given. So time will heal only if we make an active partnership with the time given to us. And in that, every single moment has meaningfulness. This meaning is no big, abstract, lofty, mission to be found somewhere. There's meaning in every moment. Meaning is evolving every moment. So time heals when I say, well, not quite. What I mean is, yes, it does. But it is not like it is the only thing that will. We will have to make an active, mindful partnership with the way time is unfolding with us. We will have to take an active ownership for our healing, a mindful ownership for our healing, and return to life. Have I answered your question, Mohitji?
Yes, I think, in fact, there are a couple of questions similar to that because this is a very common phrase, ma'am. So I thought this would be very important. And many times when we come across someone, we always say, okay, time will heal. So I thought this would actually answer to many others, including me. But before we move to Anshuji, she has a question. And just before, in your book, you have mentioned about this myths and misconceptions. You have spoken about a family which actually went through an acute pain with 3 of the children passing away because of a certain kind of blood disorder. I think there is a sequence why you mentioned that story just before myths and conceptions, because this concept of time will heal in that story can just not be placed. It's next to impossible. And I can only empathize. I can only think about it. Otherwise, the pain that the parents would have gone. Can you tell something about that so that before Anshuji asks her question, that might just give some perspective to everyone who has joined us?
Thank you for asking this, Mohitji. It's not easy to talk about that story. And but before talking about it, you talked of myths and misconceptions, and you talked about time heals. So, some other common cliches and cliched advices and platitudes that I would request everyone to see that how best they can avoid it, or at least be mindful of why they are saying so and with what intent, and don't leave the griever with that. Then thereafter stay with them to work with that cliche or platitude if you have well meant it. So be strong, be brave. I remember within an hour of my son's funeral, a very intelligent, otherwise I think of her as a very intelligent, wise and well-turned out woman, visitor to our home. She and another colleague of my husband, who was my college senior also, they both said, they shook me up on shoulders and they said, "You're a brave person. You will not cry. You will not cry." This is within an hour of my son's funeral, and we 3 had performed the funeral together. I, against the societal norms, the priests were also very accommodative and supportive. I had also joined in the performing the funeral. So cliches like be strong, be brave, you are brave, you will not cry, you have to look after your family and move on, let go. For God's sake, please avoid them. Definitely not in the immediacy of the loss. And also not when you see that though some time has elapsed, but the person is still in grief, which they will be. Beneath their mask, external mask of strength and adaptation, they might still be grieving very hard inside. So avoid these cliches and platitudes, especially let go and move on. Now coming to that story that you talked about. So I didn't directly get to work with this family. I had received the call from a medical social worker when their third child, their daughter, their only daughter, two elder sons had already passed away. And their third child was to undergo chemotherapy. And they were mobilizing funds because the family had already spent all their money. They were from Madhya Pradesh. They were in Delhi for treatment. And they were not able to do any work. So they had spent all their earnings long ago. So she reached out, and some funds mobilization was happening. And that was in the evening. Next morning, I called her up to say that 3-4 more people along with myself, we have transferred money in the morning. And that's when she informed me that the child was lost the previous night. And even though she was being prepared for her fourth chemo. And that was very, very shattering for me because she had briefly told their story to me. And I did not have the heart to say, to offer myself and say that, I want to go and meet them. It was several days that I could not find the strength to go and meet them, despite being a bereaved parent myself. And eventually when I did, I saw some people, very well-meaning people, telling them, other social workers over there or people from their own social circle, telling them things like, be brave, God chooses you for your suffering for a reason. All those very well-meant but clichés and hollow platitudes. And the father was sitting there in total dazed, stony silence. And the woman, the mother's hysterical wail would deafen you literally. And I still, my body feels the pain of that moment when I recall that now. And eventually, second or third meeting, I think, when I got to meet them, we began to speak. First two meetings, we could not find a way to even utter a word. And third meeting, mother only was speaking hard, and she was very angry, fiercely angry to God, but more than that, to her society, who kept pushing her to accept, move on, time will heal, time will heal. Here are parents who have lost all their 3 kids to a rare blood disorder before the kids even got into their adolescence, in their teen years. How do you expect them to move on just like this? There's such a strong sense of betrayal. There's such a strong sense of disbelief. The whole assumptive world has come apart. Their life views, their worldview has totally been shattered. They've been left with nothing, totally bereft. How do you expect them to respond positively to your cliches like be strong, move on, let go. Eventually, when the father spoke, barely a few words, all that he said was that he said it in Hindi, ki us thug ne mera ghar loot liya. And he referred to God as thug, us thug ne mera ghar loot liya. Do you think you can get past that so easily? Even the best, most competent grief practitioner would not try to make an intervention in that space at that moment, other than holding space with compassion, with fully mindful presence, with an alert eye to that they should not harm themselves, but allow their grief process to unfold. And slowly and gradually, when you see small, tiny pockets of some kind of readiness and willingness, then start to help them slowly and gradually engage with their grieving process. That's why I say time heals. Well, not quite. We have to start taking over our grieving process, but don't push people into that. Definitely not such traumatic bereavement cases. His metaphor for grief was, it's only snakes and there's no ladder. And he said, the only ladder that I have is ladder of my faith. Eventually, they started to participate in some kind of a social support for other, parents from underprivileged background whose children are fighting the rare blood disorders. And so they just started to volunteer their services as part of another support group back home in Madhya Pradesh. So I don't know if I've answered.
No, I think because it was not a question, ma'am. I tell you why I wanted that story to be told to everyone. because there's so many other stories, observations from various books that you have mentioned in your book. But specifically, I think this is not taught anywhere to us. We are being taught about how to make rockets, how to be well versed with artificial intelligence, but we are not taught about this basic intelligence of interaction, especially during the time when we need human beings the most. A robot might not be able to do it for us. Because what you have also mentioned just after this is you also mentioned about keep faith, and your story actually, this story of this narration is all about keeping that faith. And it happened while I was reading your book. I asked one of my friends, her father is admitted. And most of the times during COVID, we were together, we were fighting situation together, be it remdesivir, be it getting beds, and we were together. And this time it's her father who's admitted. And I was just, my usual way of telling you, be strong, yeah. But after reading it, I actually wrote, keep faith, Shraddha Saburi. And as we all follow, many of us follow Sai Baba, it's only in those two words, which is have faith and patience, that everything can be taken care of. I would now request Anshuji to please ask your question. And
thank you, Mohit. Thank you so much. Hello, Neena ji. It's a pleasure. I've had a very recent interaction with Neena ji, and I was overwhelmed. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. So, Mohit ji, I'll not take much time. Get to the question quick. Like you said, this is essentially my question. Also revolve around that we are not taught the intelligence of interaction. And that's where my question roots from, Dr. Neena. In my podcast that I've recently launched and running these 13 episodes and the book that I've authored, I've come across many people who are fighting grief. So I'll just set context very quickly. One, that I interviewed a trekker for my book, and she lost her life partner who was her source of inspiration for trekking and adventure. I interviewed a bike stunter who he did biggest of stunts and longs to be with his mother who he lost very early. A friend who her husband said, I'm bringing the cake home at midnight, and said, just step down the house and catch the packet from the car because there's too much stuff. And he never reached home because he was hit on the road just a little before it was midnight, and he never reached home, and the whole family was standing down to receive him to catch that cake packet. And I myself lost my father when I was 12 years of age. Now, when all these people started talking about their grief, a question that emerged throughout my conversations with them was, of course, in everything that they speak, they mention the person they've lost. So, for example, this lady would always talk about her husband. I barely have a conversation where I don't mention my father. So this is a repeated behavior that was visible in everybody. A common question that was put up was, you're still grieving. And because you mentioned this person all the time, you're still grieving. So my question is it that the closure hasn't happened? Does this need a formal closure? And is this constant mention a problem? Because how do I address this? That's pretty much my question, Dr. Neena.
Thank you for asking this, Anshuji. And this is another big myth that I'm talking in the book about, that so much time has happened and now the grief should be over. So there's no timeline, there's no set trajectory to grief. There's no one single thumb rule that would work for all. There's no one single thumb rule that would work even for the same person in different phases of grief, on the same loss or in different losses. Okay, so, and there's no linear way that we go through, much misconception comes from a wrong interpretation and flawed application of Kubler-Ross 5 stages model, which is about dying, not about grief, and which in fact was so flawed that at a later point in time, she herself debunked it. People don't know that. So there's no stages. Acceptance ho gaya to bhul jao. You know, here the acceptance might have happened early on, but the emotional brain in the gut, the spiritual part of you, which is entwined with your loved one, they take time to get untwined, right? The mortal body has gone, has disappeared, but the relationship has not died. Still in your heart or in your mind, you might be having a consciousness dialogue with your loved one. Say, for example, in your case, your father, or in my case, my son. You know, that sometimes I might be having a consciousness dialogue, even asking for his advice, even asking for his perspective. Even though mind knows that there's going to be no answer, but my own unconscious projecting an answer, right? So the big myth that grief has to be closed, please, no, it's only a myth. I know people who are most resolved, who have gone to immense depths of post-traumatic growth, who have emerged back into life with such inspiring levels of self-transcendence. And yet their grief is alive and has never closed. Because as I said early on in the meeting today, grief is the cry of love. You tell me you have stopped loving your father. You can get over the grief. There's no getting over. As my younger son Pratyush, when he was not yet 19, he spoke at World Appreciative Inquiry Conference. And the title of his talk was Transcending Grief. So he says that in his words, there's no getting over. This transcending. And in transcending, you don't leave that behind. You take it along, you know. Somewhere in the book, you would see, I think in Brazilian adaptation chapter, if I remember right, I use the metaphor of Japanese art of kintsugi, which is about golden joinery. You don't discard the broken cup. You just redo it with golden lacquer. So you affirm your grief. You do not get over it, Anshuji. And when we affirm our grief, we learn to integrate it and assimilate it in our life like any other significant life event, like any other significant life process. So it's like, you know, because of our human conscious mind simplification, we have to create fragmented categories. This is dark, this is light, this is day, this is night. But look at nature. Nature is never in day, never in day alone, and never in night alone. Nature is constantly in the flux, right? We need our sleep time so we don't get to see the night. But the truth is that nature is holding both of them together in simultaneity. And that's the whole submission of my book. My book says it's not, many people ask me, why is it not grief to growth? Because my humble submission is grief is not something that we have to be done with before we can get on with the growth process. Grief and growth are co-pilgrims. Growth does not demand that grief be done with, then only I will happen to you. And grief does not banish out growth. Both hold space for each other. In chapter 3 of the book, I present something called eternal spiral of grief and growth. So they merge and emerge, merge into and emerge from each other. Loss and love are both simultaneous truths of life. So please don't tell anybody, get over your grief or why you are still grieving. As long as you think it's okay. If it has created some pathological or medical complications and you think a professional intervention is called for, please, by all means, do that. But don't push people to do their grief. There's no doing of the grief. We learn to live with it. We learn to transcend it.
Thank you, Neena ji. I think we have a guest, Shakunji, who's part of our community, a very learned, herself an author, a learner, and for her age is just a number. And she always believes to be in this state of learning, which at one point of time, Utkarsh has also written in his one of the poems, which is about traveling light. But before that, Shakunji wants to share something, and I would request Shakunji to please.
So, Neena ji, everything has been covered. Whatever you have said, I am totally with it. So for me, it's just a sharing, something that how I dealt with it. I lost my father when I was only 4 years old. My mother was widowed very young. So and she was a very sensible, spiritual lady. So she managed. I won't go into the details, but admirable lady. I saw her go through the whole process. I had a good marriage, but it lasted 49 years of good marriage. So, and also another thing is that I would like to say how I dealt with it. Very, very quickly, how I dealt with it is because I do the Gita and I am a kind of thinker, as Mohitji said. I kind of felt that I have always learned over life to focus on gratitude. I focus, that is a habit, but that is not something that you can do immediately. So when he passed at 49, we were married 49 years, my immediate reaction, the way I dealt with it was to be grateful for the 49 years that we had and to be grateful that he did not suffer. Whichever way, the final ailment was very, very brief. But I said, a man of dignity, he has to go with dignity. This was the way I managed to deal with my grief. And also, I will not say that I have forgotten him, as you very clearly say. I did not forget my father. My father always lives in my memories. But one thing is that I missed him until my husband was a father. We both had 3 children. And when I saw him nurturing his children, I realized that gap was filled for me. But yes, I agree with everything else you've said, but I have focused on gratitude and the fact that he did not suffer. And, but of course, there is no comparison with losing a man with who you will live for 49 years and losing a young child. I'm not trying to bring down that. But grief is grief, as you say. When you know that you are never going to see that person, when you know that the bell is not going to ring, whether the telephone bell or the doorbell, it is something that you have to live with almost all your life. But I guess one lives a new normal. So I won't take more of your time. Thank you so much for giving me. I hope it is of some help to some people who are listening.
Thank you very much, Shagunji. Thank you very much. Like always, it's been a pleasure.
And you may like the final chapter that begins with gratitude, the path of grace in the book. And thank you so much for talking about gratitude.
And that's why, Dr. Neena, to whomever I'm sending this book, in my letter, I'm writing that if you wish, you can start this book from the last page. And anywhere you start, you will get something where you want your answer. There's a very, I think should say, very pertinent question that has come from Sumedha Bhattaji. And she has asked me to ask this question to you. She's asking, when tragedy strikes a family and everyone has to assume the position of a rock to keep the family together, how do you gently and compassionately nudge each member towards their own journey of acceptance and release of grief without coming across as weak? How to do that, Dr. Neena? Because many times it happens. Be brave for your children. Be brave for your father. Be brave for someone else. And how to do that?
So, thank you for asking this, Sumedha-ji. So, this happened with me. My life had responsibilities and on my shoulders and expectations from me. So I had to quickly get on with my strength mask and quickly return to functional things, even when I was in total daze, within 2 days of our loss. So I don't know, my reflexes might have been working. I don't have recall of what I did, how I did, but I'm supposedly told that I managed my household also in those circumstances and all the guests, etc., visitors. So would I recommend it to another person? Never. It has a cost. It has a very damaging cost. Forcing yourself to wear mask when you're breaking inside to get on with the responsibilities perhaps does not help. It harms more. All of us know how grief hits hard. Very few of us understand how grief hits mind, brain behavior. But I don't think I have not come across very many people who even acknowledge or sense how grief hits body. Body keeps the score. All the trauma comes to settle in the body. So when you're forcing yourself to act strong, even though your body-mind system, body-mind-heart system inside has fallen apart, you are accumulating a lot more. So 2.5 years down the line after my loss, I suddenly was diagnosed with full-blown type 2 diabetes at a dangerous score of 12.7 when there was no external sign. And it was only a medical checkup when, comprehensive checkup, and they got my HbA1c score also, and it said 12.7, and we were in disbelief. So body had been keeping the score while I had been acting strong on the outside. So what should we do? I have written in the book somewhere that help the people who could be your helper, help you. Help them help you. So some people who might be genuinely wanting to help you and support you sometimes stay quiet or stay away because A, they are awkward. They are not socially groomed or individually attuned to be around a person in grief. Or they're confused how to reach out with help to you. Or, they're just being too cautious that they may not end up hurting you, but they want to help you. So if you know one such person who could be of help to you, pick up the phone yourself, tell them that this is what I need of you. Please hold me. Please hold space for me. I need your support. And follow the airline safety instruction. You cannot help your family without taking some amount of care of yourself. So little amount of self-care is needed. Allow your body to rest even if sleep is elusive. Let your body rest for at least 4 to 6 hours a day, maybe in spells, even if sleep is elusive. If you do not feel like eating, keep sipping water, keep taking light liquid food, but take care of yourself before you take care of others. You cannot take care of anybody else without taking care of yourself. And in that, reach out to people who you think can help you. Help them help you. Tell them your needs. And if you think you need support or care of an expert companion or a counselor, do not hesitate. Go and take that, especially if your life circumstances are really demanding it of you to wear your strength mask and go about doing things. Then maybe find a way to get help yourself so that, this additional weight on you does not shatter and break you completely.
At this point of time, there are so many questions, and some of my friends have also, they know, considering my level of punctuality, that I start on time, I finish on time. We've taken our time, but as I said, Neena ji, that we are not keeping a tab on time today because this is something which is beyond time. Few things really need to have more engagement. We can discuss some more questions. But prior to that, if Pratyush is here, and you mentioned Pratyush narrates that poetry, Pratyush, if you are here and if you would like to do that now, we will be more than happy and delighted. Please, we can take 5 more minutes. And
the prayer poem, I guess, is what I mentioned that he likes to recite, which is the last page of the book. For those who have
page 279. Right?
Yeah.
So it's titled The Prayer. May we embrace our pain with a sense of purpose. May we meet adversity with a worldview of abundance. May we heal our wounds with the warmth of our wisdom. May we see and create meaning in our suffering. May we grow strength in the garden of sorrow. May we cradle our loss with love. May we savor our dark with our light. May we serve the purpose we are chosen for. May we share the nectar of our growth with others. May our journey of grief become pilgrimage of growth. May we partake nature's grace and spread ours in the world.
Thank you, Pratish. There are many questions, Neeraji, but that's where we thought we will have more discussions on each and every word of the book. And that's why we are requesting everyone to have the book. We are sending it to many people. And in turn, if you can also send it to others. And very soon we will all come onto a platform, possibly a digital way we can interact in our pursuit of whatever we can do with books, because we believe books are not just meant to be read and to keep with us. And as Utkarsh would have always dreamt of building libraries, taking books to people who need them the most, irrespective of their socio-economic or say political purposes. But we'll have to take a tab of time here because we all have our other engagements though. But the journey continues. And before we go, Neenaji, I would like you to actually recite the poem by Utkarsh, which is Breathe Quiet, Eat Light. It's page 210. I think that summarizes the purpose of life a big way. And at that young age, if he can think like this, why not this message reach everyone who's here, who's listening, or will listen it later on as well.
It's the chapter of transformation that ends with that.
Yes, yes.
So it's a tiny part from a very long poetry.
Yeah.
So Utkarsh is the Shakespeare of the family. He started to write when he was 5 years. So he was born poet. So this is something that we had also read. We had a close friend read this part in the prayer meeting that we held after his passing on. So it's breathe quiet, eat light, sleep tight, share forward what life has given you in excess of your needs. Do what you can and travel light. If you allow me a moment, I'll just like to share a tiny part of the very long backstory about from where came share forward what life has given you in excess of your needs and do what you can. So, so the time when he started the pavement libraries, it was right after the time when he started to volunteer at his school, where the afternoon school, the school had started a 3-hourly afternoon school for girls from a nearby slum area. And they had sent home notices inviting the parents to volunteer as community educators for those girls. And I was in a very, very tough job at that point in time. I used to return home late. And so obviously I could not go, and the boy was very disappointed and sad that his mother could not come. So what he did was he volunteered himself. Next PTM, the teacher tells me that your son is the youngest in the school to volunteer as a tutor, and he's going to teach them maths and science. And he was in class for himself. And I said, what are you going to do? And my guilt till date, my mind immediately did not go for, warmth and pride and appreciation and gratitude for being blessed with a child like this. Immediately, my first worry was that now how will I arrange his pickup at 4 p.m.? What will I do to arrange his pickup from the school at 4 p.m. and things like that? My mind started to work in the direction of figuring out logistics. So till date, I feel bad about that. And his answer was, he told me the tiny Tweety bird story in response. The tiny Tweety bird, when the jungle was on fire and all the animals were running, and the Tweety bird was picking a droplet each of the water in its beak and would drop on the burning jungle. A running animal asked, a big mighty animal asked, little bird, what are you doing? And the bird said, I'm doing what I can. So when I asked my son that you're only 8 and barely couple of months, and what do you think you can do? And he told me this story, and at the end he said, Mama, I can do what I can. So, and that's the motto that we as a family now live with, that we are trying to do what we can. We are not like him, quiet Sufi types. We are not doing it fully invisibly. Our work does get talked about once in a while, but we are trying to do it in the spirit in which he taught us to do. That is, share forward whatever you have got in excess of your needs. You do not have to hoard, whether out of greed or out of fear, with yourself. Just return it to nature. And thank you so much, Mohitji, for today's opportunity. Thank you so much, everyone who's there. And I would say that, of course, we are closing, though we are late by 17 minutes, but anyone and everyone who wants to have a personal conversation, Mohitji, please feel free to pass my number. Sure. And if at any point in time, if you want to have a guided reading or facilitated reading and more experiencing kind of session, please consider me free and available and very willing for that all the time. Thank you.
As you said, Neena ji, we can't be more thankful, but I think I'm thankful to everyone who made this a possibility of bringing everyone together. And this Sangathan is very important. And I think the God needed him more, I guess, because of his wisdom, his capability. And whatever now God is showering on us is because of the good people around him up there in the heaven, I guess. And as a little bird...
Sorry to interrupt you. Shagunji talked about gratitude in the aftermath of her husband's demise. This is what Pratyush did with me when one day I was lamenting God and I was literally hysterical, even though I was not making any sound, but I think hysteria was all writ large over my demeanor. And I was lamenting God and saying that, why did he snatch him away at just 22 when his life was at an important juncture? And that's when Pratyush, all of 18, he just said that, Mama, can you put it this way, that he gave high to you for 22 years?
Yeah.
And so that is gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, gratitude for having been gifted the gifts of life, the blessings of life.
Certainly, we all need to travel light. We're more than happy to participate in this journey with you, Neena ji, Pratyush ji, and Yogesh ji. Keep faith, everyone, and we are around, as we mentioned. Thank you once again. Namaskar to everyone.
Thank you so much.